Welcome to We and Lewis, a show dedicated to celebrating the remarkable, creative, and energetic people who live in Lewis and are helping our community forge a collective soul as appealing as it is unique. They are the We and Lewis. I'm Kevin McGinnis. Our guest today is Jen Mason, the creator of Biblion, the used bookstore in town, Vintage Underground, the music store underneath, and one of the founders of the History Book Festival, a nationally recognized book festival that attracts well-known authors from around the country. Today's episode is brought to you by the Lewis Chamber of Commerce, which was organized in April 1975 to advance the general welfare and prosperity of the Lewis area so that its citizens in all areas of its business community can prosper. Betsy Reamer and her team have certainly accomplished that. Over the last couple of years, membership has more than doubled, and the number of events they sponsor include the Lewis British Motor Car Show, the Lewis Garden Tour, and the Lewis Tulip Celebration, as well as many others like this podcast. If you're visiting the Chamber's office at the historic Fisher Martin House at 120 Kings Highway, basically doubles as a visitor center. Jen, again, morning, and thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Kevin. Thank you.
One of the cornerstones of the Lewis event calendar is the annual History Book Festival. The festival has become not only popular here in the city, but among authors and publishers around the country. Tell us about this year's event.
We're super excited, Kevin. This is our second year being back in person after 2 years being online during the pandemic. And we're pinned to the very last Saturday of every September. So the main festival, which is free and open to the public, anyone can come, is on Saturday, September 30th. It's preceded by a keynote with Steve Inskeep and Christina Schutt, who's the director of the Lincoln Library, the night before. And then there are still tickets available for James McBride, who is speaking on Sunday afternoon.
How does a festival in a town of roughly 4,000 people, if you include children and pets, attract over 2,000 attendees year in and year out?
Because Lewis is cool. It is.
I think that's better than all the other slogans we ever think. We should just go with Lewis is cool.
Yeah. No, it's the kind of place where, in terms of starting the festival, what made me realize it was possible, because honestly, when I started looking, I thought, oh my gosh, this could be a good town for a book festival. But when I started to look at some of the smaller town events, they were often really limited to more regional authors, just less fun for me. And so that's where the idea came to focus on history, because I thought, well, if you limit it, if you have a focus, then maybe you'd have a chance to bring more sort of top shelf authors, as it were. And so by doing that, we've also been able to sort of attract a certain sort of reader as well, which is very much in keeping with Lewis and with our focus on history here in the community. It's also been a way for us to engage a lot of other area nonprofits. So the board that we formed is very focused on trying to use this event to raise all boats. So it automatically gets an audience sort of seeded by reaching out to other nonprofits to engage their audiences around books that are relevant to their missions.
But when you use the word history, it's a very broad definition
It
of the
is.
word. It's not.
But most people think about like world leaders and politics and war. That's what they think about. And the History Book Festival, it's a mix of narrative nonfiction. From the very start, we've been really focused on story. There's a quote from Kipling that I used to open the first festival, which is, if history were taught in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. And for us, that's it. It's like the story becomes the thing that really hooks you and lets you remember and have a framework for that memory. So it's narrative nonfiction and historical fiction both. And we choose authors who've written on a range of subjects, a range of eras, And then also try to choose people who come from different perspectives, so they bring different voice. And then the tagline for the festival is "Find Your Place in History." So it obviously has this relation to the place of Lewis, but also to the fact that each of us are intimately tied to history. Each of us, when we look at history just through the lens of world leaders, we don't think about the everyday people who really are the drivers of history, and that's what we all are. By focusing on history in particular, often at the larger book festivals, some of them have hundreds and hundreds of authors. It's crazy how large some of them are. It's crazy to me because I know how much work it is. I'm like, oh my gosh, we would not want that. We would not want to do that to our town, and we don't want to do that to ourselves. We only start things that are fun. So anyhow, at those larger festivals, sometimes these history books are kind of the more quiet books. They're not like drawing 100, 200 people to hear those authors. They're maybe drawing 10. Whereas here, those authors get to be the stars. I'd had this idea way back when Claire, my daughter, was in high school. And it wasn't long after I'd started actually, it was when she was still in middle school, because it wasn't long after I started the bookstore. And anyway, I went around to several people in town. I told them all about it. I'm like, God, this is my idea. And nobody, just like when I started the bookstore, it took about a year after I started the bookstore before all of my friends and neighbors started telling me how crazy they thought I was to start a used bookstore.
Were they all very polite when you first raised the idea?
Oh, 100%. And they all pitched in and helped. Like Libby Owen paint that black table in the front entry and helped me reupholster the chairs. And Margaret Beale and Denise Emery helped me clean and price books. It was so cute. Everybody was there to help. But yeah, they told me to my face when I came up with this idea that they thought it was ridiculous and nobody wanted to help. And so I was like, okay. And then Claire was busy during high school. So I was like, I just can't focus on this right now. I've got to stay elsewhere with my time and energy. So I shelved the idea until one day, this dude who had just recently bought a house over in Cape Shores, Ron Collins, stopped into my store and he's like, my wife Susan and I just bought this house over in Cape Shores. We live in Bethesda, but we want to retire here. And he said, I'm a writer and I do a lot of other stuff with writers in the DC area. And I really want to do something here that involves writers. I'm like, well, there's the Writers Guild. And then I said, well, I had this idea. And so I told him my idea and he's like, I know people who write history who might think that was fun. And then it was so cool because he started bringing in his friends and bouncing the idea off of them. And they're like, yeah, that could really work. And then he had a friend who had founded the Savannah Book Festival, which isn't one of the Million Man March festivals. It's more around 40 to 50 authors. So a little more akin to the size of the Lewis event. And he was so excited. And when he came here, one of his quotes was, Lewis looks like a movie set for a book festival. So we were like, yep. And it took us, there were some organizations that were a little slower on the uptake in terms of, saying yes to me and Ron. But some that were yes, from the start. The Lewis Public Library was one. They were so excited about this possibility. The other was Browse About Books in Rehoboth Beach. We had actually talked to somebody who was a bookseller here in Lewis, and we thought, oh, maybe they would be our bookseller. But then when I wanted to let Susan Kehoe, who was managing Browse About at the time and who now owns it, I was going to let her know that we were going to think about doing this. And in that initial conversation, she's like, hey, we would be all over this. So I went back to the board. I'm like, here's another way for us to raise all boats. And it was amazing because then that connection with Browse About and the library, you may have noticed, has also continued to bear amazing fruit for our community. So they're both amazing on their own, but together it's incredible.
Now, the festival is staffed, appears by quite a few volunteers. Is that right?
Yeah, so we were volunteer only from the inception. And then after 2019 was when we realized, so 2019, we really started to see a change. Like you mentioned, how do we draw these people? So the fact that we do sort of make the history writers the stars is one thing. But I think the festival has just grown in reputation and stature over time as well. And so people are attracted to us that way. When we first started the festival, we were thinking, oh, narrative nonfiction. Eric Larson would be our dream author. Like, that's the king of narrative nonfiction right now. And we thought maybe 5 years down the line, maybe we'd get him. They came to us in 2019 for his 2020 book tour, which was in March of 2020. And we had over 700 people coming on St. Patrick's Day in March, which did not happen because it was right as everything shut down. So he ended up becoming our virtual keynote, and he was delightful. So the thing we realized with that is, yes, we had managed doing all of the author liaison communications logistics with volunteers, but the woman who had sort of led that, Barbara Hames, stepped forward and said, you know what, this cannot be done by volunteers. This needs to be a paid position. So even when the pandemic hit, and the woman Kathy Tessine, who we'd lined up to take on that role, she said, oh, I'll just volunteer. And the board was like, oh yeah, no, this is going to be a professional position. And so since then, we've continued to grow gently the professional support of the festival. Sam Shelton and Jeff Fabian take care of all our marketing and graphic work. So you've seen their work quite a lot. And then we have another woman, Jen Epler, working with Kathy on author-related things and logistics-related things. And then we brought in this year someone to be what we call the hub of the spokes. Her name's Justina, and she helps sort of everything run smoothly. So we're just sort of continuing to take one step at a time.
For those who've attended, the festival appears to operate pretty much seamlessly. It's like going to a party and never having to see the kitchen. Is this how you pull it off? Is you have a mix of volunteers and a tight core of professionals?
Yeah, and I'm anal retentive. Because, we script out the whole thing, and we have time frames put on each event. We have MCs that run each event. They know that we're like a Swiss watch when it comes to time, and it keeps the train running. The other thing that makes it work is that we don't rush. A lot of festivals run their events back to back to back to back to back, and we don't. We have a half-hour break between each event, so that gives the authors plenty of time to get, remiked, and other folks to go get their books signed, and people to maybe change venues and go see something at another venue. So, and the Lewis line runs for us. We rent them for the day, so they are able to deliver people down to 2nd Street, as well as to, our other venues.
So this year's festival, how many authors do you have? How many volunteers do you have working it? How many people who are doing the introductions or moderating the presentation?
Right.
What's the staff look like for all of this?
So it's a little over 100 people total. So there are people who are those, what we call our site managers, as well as our MCs who run each of the venues. We have folks who help them, who have much shorter shifts. And so they come in and welcome people and help clean up and manage the book signings. And then there are a group of folks that we call our author ambassadors. So each one of them, you're familiar with this one.
I am.
Kevin. So each one of them is assigned an author that they're their person while they're in town. So if they have questions, if they need assistance with something, we're there for them.
Did your experience with your stores, Biblion and Vintage Underground, did they help provide you with sort of the business confidence that this festival could work?
I've run all different kinds of things since I've been young. I like organizing. I like creating. I had grown up in a small town, which was in a very rural area, very farmer, in Kansas. In Kansas. So very similar culturally to down here in the sense that folks were pretty reserved and not used to folks from outside, whereas here people had gotten this heavy dose of, oh my gosh, suddenly a lot of people from outside.
You're in Kansas. How did you get from Kansas on to...
Okay, so this is actually maybe not a terrible question, Kevin. Have you ever taken the Myers-Briggs? It's a personality instrument. So it doesn't tell you who you are, but it tells you how you look two-dimensionally from a perspective. So...
Oh, that test.
Yeah.
Yes.
Introversion versus extroversion, yes. Blah, 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 blah. So one of the things they measure is intuitive versus sensate. And 75% of the population is sensate. 25 of us are intuitive. And the Myers-Briggs is structured in a way that it looks at you on a continuum. So like when you look at my introversion versus extroversion, I am solidly on the introvert side, but I'm not like over in the gutter. I am kind of a little more toward the midstream, right? When you look at me when it comes to intuitive, Jenny doesn't have any sensate. There is none. I have no sensate capacity whatsoever. I operate entirely on intuition. And because I've had to work in environments that require that require me to be more concrete, I've developed skill sets, but my core way of functioning is intuitive. So when it came time to choosing a school for college, I had looked back east. I was completely excited about it. But Mr. Flaming, my guidance counselor, who also went to my church, he told me, Jenny, don't go east. He said they have their own ways of doing things, their own systems. You are too open, and they will eat you alive, is what he said. And I'm like, okay, Mr. Flaming. So all the schools that I thought I was interested in, I was like, no. And so I started, visiting all these other schools, and I was having a good time. And I had this woman named Sharon that I worked in a little tiny restaurant growing up, and she was a waitress with me, and we'd go walk around the lake behind my house after our shifts. And she told me about this college that she went to in Oklahoma called Oklahoma Christian College. I mean, I went to church, but I wasn't like, it was important to me, but it wasn't the center of my life at that point. And this was a school that was affiliated with a church that I'd never even heard of. And so I went, and they had like this scholarship competition thing, and I ended up winning. And I'm like, oh. And then I went, and I was like, so I asked the dude who was part of the scholarship thing. I'm like, I don't know anything about this church. Tell me about it. And so I thought about it later. I thought, yeah, that probably was part of my shoe-in. Because it was a very evangelical bent. And so I was, anyway. And I went, and it was great for me. Because I was this very small town kid who didn't have a lot of confidence beyond. And it was small enough and safe in a way that really allowed me to kind of start to bloom. And then they started a European studies program while I was there. And so I got chosen for that. And then I moved back after I was done. To Vienna.
To Vienna.
Yeah. So, and I traveled quite a lot while I was there. So
Vienna, are we talking about Vienna, Austria?
Austria.
Okay.
Yeah.
So so the school, from your school, you had an opportunity to go to Vienna, Austria.
Right.
You graduated and then you moved back to overseas.
Yeah.
And what did you do there?
Worked on a book with friends that I had made. Yeah. So it was fun, and traveled, because I figure that's the time in your life where you're supposed to do that, right?
And what brought you back to the States?
I thought I was going to do a graduate degree, and because of Mr. Flaming, I thought, I guess I should try moving to the Northeast and living there for a while before I make a decision. And I wanted to work. So I ended up moving to Connecticut. It was down, I was originally in New Canaan, and then I moved to New Haven, where I paid for 3 graduate degrees.
You have 3 graduate degrees?
No, I paid for 3 graduate degrees.
You didn't get any?
No. Yep. I married someone who became a priest, who's no longer a priest, who is my daughter's dad, and my daughter loves him, and they're in a great relationship. He lives in Brooklyn.
But you did have an opportunity to work at Yale, as I understand.
I did. I ran the giving programs for Yale's professional schools. I had about 50,000 alumni under me with around 700 volunteers.
So you're at Yale University. Phenomenal. And you're doing many of the same skills you're developing at Yale, which apply beautifully for running a book festival or opening a bookstore or a vintage underground. It's
once you'd learn how to herd cats, then you can just apply that to anything. I had run a program installing satellite systems for AT&T. And yeah, that was really fun. And it was all these, crusty dudes who had survived multiple layoffs. So they were, they're more our age, Kevin. Yeah, crusty old dudes. It was fun. And I learned a lot because I was, young kid in my 20s, trying to lead this. And yeah, it teaches you a lot about people and how to be present to people and how to herd cats.
Did you have any idea from a linear standpoint where this is all leading? It's just fascinating. You were developing all these skills.
No, and I didn't care. I don't care. It's all fun in the moment, as long as you keep making choices that things can be fun in the moment. And that's why I am, like when I was at Donnelly, one of the things I had to teach my people is what I called the no dance, where even when we were on, because then it wasn't video, it was conference calls, and I would make them, who knows if they actually did it, but the people who were in the room with me did it. I'd make them stand up and put one foot down and the other foot down and say the word no, because I was in this corporate context. Most of our team's clients were internal, and there had been a history of everybody just saying yes to everything. Well, then you couldn't make a decision. You couldn't make business decisions because the yeses were meaningless. Of course, you want to be able to deliver it, but can you actually deliver it on that timeline that they're asking for? No. And so you have to actually do the work to know what's possible. And then from there, then you can say yes. But you have to be able to lead your client and let them know what's possible. We do not say yes to something we cannot do.
What got you to Lewis?
A failed marriage. I was in Lancaster.
In Lancaster.
Yeah, in this really cool old house that had been built by the original opera house founder there. And with Claire's dad, doing that thing with Claire, and very shortly into her life is when I was on my own with her. And like any good failure who'd never really had a lot of failure, I jumped right into another relationship not long after, intuitively speaking. And found out right after I'd gotten married that there were some issues that I probably should have maybe tuned into a little better, but I hadn't. And so I was like, well, okay, we're here now. So we're going to make the most of it. And that person really wanted to live in Rehoboth. And so I'm like, okay. And I'm a bloom where you're planted person. I don't feel tied to anything. I just like having fun wherever I am. And so I'm like, okay. And then we came here and I picked my church, and that's how I developed ties and community. To me, Lewis just felt so much more like home from the beginning. And so when I had the idea for the bookstore, that, it was just no question.
This second relationship got you here.
Yes. And then it failed.
But
ethically. But actually quite amicably.
Where was the moment that the inspiration for opening Biblion came from?
So it was after the marriage failed, and part of Claire was still at Rehoboth Elementary, so I was renting a house near there, and I was living off of my savings because I figure that's what your savings should do. They should save you. I had been approached about doing becoming the executive director of one of the nonprofits in the area. And I was like, Claire was in fifth grade at Rehoboth Elementary.
She was in elementary school.
Near the end. And I was like, I think that as much as she's needed me up to now, I think she's going to need me more as she goes into her teenage years. And I thought, I know me. If I go into and I know nonprofits, because when I was in Lancaster, I worked, I was the development director for Lancaster Daycare Center, which I can tell you about their history. They're amazing. And that really showed me that in Yale, how consuming nonprofit work can be. And I thought, if I go that direction, or if I try to go back into the corporate world, I won't be here for Claire. My mind and my body will be somewhere else. And I can't manage night meetings and events and all that kind of thing. The most I could do, I had hired a babysitter so I could go to choir practice. That was my big thing. That was my big outing every week. So anyhow, I knew I couldn't do that. And the ladies of the church, they were mad. They were worried about me because I wasn't working yet. But I'm like, it's okay. I have savings. It'll save me. And the other way I got through that time was meditation. I meditated and I ran, because I would run usually, 5, 8, 10 miles a day. Yeah, I ran a lot. Yeah, wow. You wouldn't tell now because my knee. But anyway, I ran a lot. And that was also meditative. And so one day I did a meditation and the bookstore came to me out of the blue. I'd never thought about opening a bookstore. Everyone's like, oh, you must have dreamed of opening a bookstore. I'm like, no, never thought of it.
You were opening a bookstore at a time when bookstores were dying.
Yep.
All over the country.
During the recession. The other thing that was
you should be a course at the Harvard Business School or one of the big business schools about overcoming all of the proper economic indicators you're supposed to consider and just throwing them away.
Yeah. Well, that's just, it's the truth about so many of the places here in town. People love them because they're true. The people who run them, like Matt or like Heidi, who you've talked with, or like Derica and Jenny, or like Misha, they're all true to who they are. And that's why people love them and they're successful.
Is that why? Does that have something to do when you go to your store, when you go to Biblion? I always walk in and I feel not only welcome, but amazingly, there's often something there I get. I want to buy. I have bought gifts for my wife there. You've saved 2 Christmases for me. And just amazing because they're not books.
Right.
Most of the things I get there aren't books.
Right. And those are all made by small businesses. All of our cards, all of our gifts are at both stores are small businesses. That's a huge part of our mission is raising those boats up. So when you're buying that Christmas present, you're supporting not just our small business, but another one.
Can you explain a little bit more about what you just said about being true? How would you describe being true? What does that mean in a commercial setting?
We don't put on airs. So, and so all of my people run the shop on their own when they're there. There may be one of us like in the back helping or whatever, but there's one person at the helm. And from my perspective, that person, their personality is what's coming out at that point. They're the ones setting the tone. And as long as they're true to themselves and they're not BSing people, if they're not trying to act like they want to, and also we don't sell anything. That's my whole, it's like I know it sounds stupid to have a retail store where we don't try to sell, but we don't. I don't like being sold. So I won't sell. And I tell my people, I don't want them selling. I don't want them saying, how can I help you? I don't want them using that language because that goes counter to everything I believe in. I want them just to be present to those people and to help create what for them is a meaningful experience. I've had people come in, a lot of, young people especially don't have much, disposable income to spend, but they're just as welcome and they're just as valued. Yeah. I mean, my message to my people is we let the store do the work. So our job is to tend to it and to be kind and to be helpful if people need help, but not to sell them things. I knew that what I wanted to do was only possible in Lewis. And that's part of when you're saying, what is the secret? The secret is the town. What I'm doing wouldn't work somewhere else.
Where did you get the courage to go in the opposite direction of so much of the instruction about how to run a company?
It's funny. A lot of people think I'm a lot smarter than I am. And as it happens, I am not smarter than I am. And since I've been little, like my pediatrician, Dr. Pennington, thought that I maybe had been dropped on my head or there's something compromised in me because I smiled so much. I've always sort of, I don't know. I just have always felt confident just doing things and stupid things. Like when I was in third grade, I decided to, maybe third or fourth, I can't remember. There was a national election going on. And so I decided to have an election between my two large stuffed dogs. One that was green and one that was white. And I got somebody else to be the campaign manager for the white one. And I was the campaign manager for the green one. And then we proceeded to have a school-wide election. For no reason. None.
So you didn't do this in the isolation of your own room at the house. You did this with the school?
Yeah, it was stupid and fun. That's what little kids do. That's all little kids should get to do stupid stuff like that and be humored. The green dog one, of course. Yeah, because I called it, I gave it some catchy name that made it sound cooler than it was. They were both they came from Six Flags or something. They were cheap and kind of easy. Yeah, bad dogs.
What led to the opening of the Vintage Underground?
I had thought about opening a record store for a long time. I mean, anybody who's been in Biblion knows that music is really important to us. But I just hadn't, sort of when I was going to open the bookstore, I figured after I had the idea, I thought, it'll probably be a couple of years, for this to all come together. And it actually ended up coming together because I was I want to definitely be on 2nd Street, and that store where I am now could be perfect, but that would never open up because the store that had been there for over a decade. Wouldn't you know, they left. They gave Ted, I went around to all the property owners to let them know I was looking and why, and figured when something came open, they'd let me know. Well, Ted came to me, Ted Becker, and said, it was probably, 6 weeks after I'd had the meditation. And then within...
Wait a minute. So you had the meditation that resulted in the opening of Biblion.
Right.
This is a subsequent meditation?
No, this is the meditation for Biblion. I had that, and I figured it would take a couple years to open it. And then 6 weeks later, Ted came to me and said, I have a spot for you. And it was perfect. And so I said yes. And by in January of 2011, we took possession of the space.
Where Biblion is now.
Where Biblion is now. And so for anybody who doesn't know, the record store is beneath Biblion. And that's where Marianne was. And Ted was starting to look at possibilities for who would go in there. And he told me that one of the leading contenders was another store for middle-aged women. And I was like, oh my God. And I had already started. This was in, it was in 2017 that he let me know. Yeah. Anyway, I was like, oh my God. I had started the book festival already because we actually started in 2016 with some of our pre-events. But I was like, we've got enough for middle-aged women. And I had this customer base, which was mostly probably 60% millennials and younger, a lot of younger people, and not limited to women who were part of the Biblion family. And I was like, I can't, no. And so I didn't know. I didn't feel like I had a choice in some ways. I felt like it just had to happen. We had to make it happen for the sake. And that's when I named it in the same way that I gave Biblion this Ed Rare Finds, because I'm like, I don't know what it's going to be other than a used bookstore with other stuff. And then that all became, and I thought, you'll just follow what works and keep doing it. And that's what I did for downstairs. I figure I'll give it a nebulous enough name that I can, follow what's working.
It sounds, though, in some ways like a band from the 60s.
Well, it actually came into being during the 50th anniversary year of White Light, White Heat. And I'm a huge Velvet Underground fan. And so that's why that's part of the name. And that's also the logo. I drove poor Teresa at then Quillen Signs, now Phillips Signs, bananas trying to get the font, because the font wasn't just a font, it was also modified. So we had to work a long time to get the font modified the way I wanted it.
So Jen, in addition to the stores, in addition to the book festival, which is not just the 3 days in September, you do things throughout the course of the year with the festival. You're involved in a lot of civic organizations here in town, including the Chamber of Commerce, Coastal Concerts, the Farmers Market, the Greater Lewis Community Village. Do you sleep?
Maybe through a few meetings. No, when I was first doing my professional resume as a young person, I put down as one, because at that point you were supposed to put down your hobbies, and I put on my hobbies attending committee meetings. I put that on my resume. Yep. Yes, I did. Yep. Yeah.
I have to admit, if I was looking at that resume and saw that, I went, nope. Nope.
Yep. I had a good time.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. What do you do to relax? Since your hobby is to attend meetings.
Right.
What do you? How do you kick back? How do you shut everything
So,
down?
it's interesting because I did try some dating, which was also really funny, and did not work out well for me. So once I gave up my sex life, I've had a lot of time for all this other stuff. And so I think, what? Kevin's losing his mind over there now.
I'm sorry. That's just great. So it really opened up you. So
Giving up my sex life made lots of room for the community.
what do you do to relax? What do you do when it's time to kick back and just take a break from all the things you're doing?
I put up a closed sign on my front door. There's one of our lines downstairs is called Blue Q. They're from Massachusetts. They do all kinds of amazing work with people who have developmental disabilities, and they're very funny. And they make these great little open close signs that they send to us, which don't work for us because ours has our logo on it. So I'm like, okay. So I took that one home and I put it up on my front door so nobody visits me. So my neighbors know, like, don't just stop by and say hi to Jen. Because Jen, this is where my introversion comes in. I love people and I love being with people and I love being with people all day long. But at the end of it, I have to just be alone a little and hang out and recover. Any other introvert will tell you that's completely normal. When you're married to an extrovert, that's painful. For them and for you.
Jen, you brought so much joy here. You brought education, exposure to our town that can't be easily replicated. You've put us literally on the map in a variety of different ways. Do you think Lewis also helped you? Did it give you a canvas or a foundation on which you could pursue all of these dreams?
100%. Yeah, because it's fertile soil. So it's fertile soil for all kinds of possibilities. And that's the thing looking forward, I hope most, that my story of being able to start something here, or Matt's story of being able to start something here, isn't unique. I hope that we as a community can figure out how to make our town, because right now everybody knows how hard it is for young people. The cost of living just makes it almost impossible for them to live here, let alone think about, investing what remains of their savings to start a business. How can we make Lewis the kind of place that inspires other people to just jump out and do something completely unexpected that can then be perfect for what it is?
If you could give advice to a young person who's thinking about starting a business here, what would you say?
To root yourself in community. Don't try the businesses that I've seen who have not been as successful here in Lewis were more isolated. And I think if you're going to be successful here in Lewis, you want to have your hand out to other people. You want to take help. You want to be helpful. You want to care about, like when Lloyd Mills comes in and says to me, "Oh my God, Jan, do you have a card for when you forget your 50th anniversary?" And we found a card for him. It had these 2 chickens on the front, and the one chicken is saying something to the other of what do you do? Or what do you say when you've forgotten your anniversary? He's like, the flowers behind his back. And the female chicken says to him something like, you can't say anything when you're dead. And so, poor Lloyd. So it's like that. That's the kind of community that we live in, where people know each other like that, and where, when somebody comes in looking for a sympathy card, who's been lost, and that somebody else already came in and got that one. So it's that kind of town.
Jen, thanks. thanks for joining us today. Thanks for this candid, wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thank you for celebrating Lewis.
It's been a blast. It's been an absolute blast.
Yay!
And thanks to our sponsor, the Lewis Chamber of Commerce. If you're a new business in town, there's no better way to meet your peers than through the Chamber. And thanks to you for being a listener and supporting the podcast. Follow us on our Instagram and Facebook accounts, We and Lewis, the podcast, and please feel free to share your thoughts and comments. Till next time, this has been We and Lewis, the podcast.